we've gone from telling white people what they want to hear to telling black people what they want to hear. As Bernie Sanders and his friends over at the progressive wing of the Democrats had something to say very recently.
Anybody working in healthcare knows, right? I mean, like, you know, the illnesses and the diseases are hard enough. They take it out of you enough, right? And then you, on top of that, you're being put through this system that says, well, you're worthy of this, you're deserving of that, you're not really quite deserving of this next piece. I take my daughters to the public library, right? And it's like nobody is scrutinizing that, oh, your dad is a doctor and he makes such and such amount of money, so you're eligible for getting these kinds of books, but not these kinds of books over here. If you want to get these, these services, you need to do it. It's none of that, right? Like, you walk in and you get to, like, just explore your mind in your education. I would love to see that for healthcare.
I'm going to present to you that we don't have a healthcare system. We call it a healthcare system, but it's not a healthcare system. It's a collection of for-profit centers with varying quality of medical care, where the idea is really to gain profit out of the system, not to take care of people.
This fight, again, in my view, is not a healthcare fight. I think it is virtually impossible for anybody to defend a system which is so expensive and leave so many people uninsured and underinsured. And very few people do try to make that defense. What our fight is about is a political fight. It's an economic fight. It's a fight that requires us to take on extraordinarily powerful special interests who really could care less if people live or die, whether they suffer or not. For them, the bottom line is their bottom line. And what I want to say as an elected official is, at the end of the day, it's not going to be Pramila and I who are going to help lead this fight. It's going to be you. And the good news is that what we're seeing all across this country is more and more doctors' organizations and more nurses' organizations and numbers are saying, you know what? We can't do our job under this dysfunctional system. Our job is to treat our patients, not to make money for the insurance companies and the drug companies.
Well, as you hear it, folks, this week, Senator Bernie Sanders is renewing his push for a new approach, Medicare for All, that he touted as a presidential candidate, with the help of Democratic reps Pramila Jayapal and Denny Dingell. I guess this would be Debbie Dingle or Debbie Dingell of Michigan. The lawmakers plan to reintroduce a bill titled Medicare for All of 2023 in both the House and the Senate on Wednesday. In the House, the proposal will have 112 co-sponsors, more than they have ever had at the introduction of the bill, Jayapal noted, despite having fewer Democratic seats than in the previous Congress. Medicare for All would create a single-payer program which would allow one source to collect all health care fees and pay all health care costs. Now, the research shows that Americans suffer under the high burden of health care costs. Almost 1 in 10 adults, or approximately 23 million people, owe medical debt. About 11 million people owe more than $2,000. And 3 million people owe more than $10,000. The new bill follows previous Medicare for All proposals. Sanders has called for comprehensive health care with no networks, premiums, deductibles, co-pays, or surprise bills. The proposal includes primary care, vision, dental, prescription drugs, mental health, substance abuse, long-term care services, and reproductive health care. It also includes universal long-term care coverage and the ability to negotiate prescription drug prices. Now, one key obstacle to implementing Medicare for All would be the cost. It is estimated that the plan would cost somewhere between $32 trillion to $38 trillion over 10 years. Today, the estimate may be slightly at around lower than 30 trillion, give or take a few trillion. Like, what's a few trillion? Those costs could be $3 trillion higher if the program were able to meet an anticipated surge in demand. The more health insurance covers, the more patients will want to consume. Yet it's unlikely all the new demand for services would be met. Now, it's important to always state, and I state very often on this show, that universal health care is supported by 68% of the American public. 68% of the American public, including half of Republicans. But the Democrats weren't done right. The Squad, which is a progressive branch of the Democratic Party, are now demanding $14 trillion in federal reparations for descendants of slaves. They say that the bill will be paid by reducing defense spending. The resolution states that the U.S. has legal and moral obligation to provide reparations for black people after hundreds of years of slavery, and calls for $14 trillion to be paid. At least the amount of the black-white wealth gap, says Missouri Congresswoman Cori Bush. Asked about the funding of the source of such a program, she suggested that the nation reduce its spending abroad and on defense. The entire U.S. GDP was $25 trillion in 2022, and the U.S. is already $31.4 trillion in debt. Now, this $14 trillion figure is in line with the findings of Duke University professor and economist William Sandy Darity, who estimates that the wealth gap is in excess of $300,000 per person, and there are roughly 40 million black people whose ancestors were enslaved in America. Now, Cori Bush says that they are working with the administration. They're talking to other members of Congress, but she says, I'll say this, if we can continue to fund these endless wars or continue to pull trillions of dollars into these forever wars, into the defense budget, beyond what they asked for, if we can send money abroad to help elsewhere, then we have to make sure, because we are talking about things that are happening now. She was flanked by activists and a number of other Democrats like Summer Lee, Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, and Barbara Lee, who is running for Senate. Cori Bush cited a litany of ways in which black people continue to live under slavery, citing the black-white wealth gap, voter suppression, segregation, redlining, and disparities in health and wealth. Now, look, if you listen to the show, then you know I support universal health care. If you listen to the show, then you know I definitely support reparations. When I was on Monday with Jonathan, I remember we talked to Cam Howard, who was from NCOBRA, which was one of the original organizations, at least in recent years, to bring the issue of reparations back to the table. One of my criticisms of our former president, allegedly the black one, was that he told black people that we didn't need reparations because we had him. That, like, he was in reparations enough. I seriously disagree with that. But here, the reason I wanted to do these stories, right? Because we're looking at two policies that I personally agree with. Personally, wholeheartedly agree with universal health care, wholeheartedly agree with reparations. But it is obvious to me, as somebody who has been studying the political game for a long time, well, long time relatively speaking for me, that what this is a ploy by the Democratic Party to keep black people and other marginalized groups voting for them while they have zero intention of making any of this happen. Now, why do I say that? I say that because the Democratic Party just had the White House, they just had the Senate, and they just had the House of Representatives. For 2 years, they did. For 2 years, people on the left tried to force the Democratic Party to talk about universal health care. There were rallies in Washington, D.C. for universal health care. And the members of the squad, which is the progressive clique supposedly led by AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Ayanna Pressley, and Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib, these people all ignored the universal health care activism that was being done. None of them came to any of the rallies. None of them tweeted about any of the rallies. None of them showed any support for any of the rallies. None of them. Bernie Sanders did not. And this has been Bernie Sanders, this has been his signature legislation for like 30 or 40 years. This is his issue. And when you have thousands and thousands of people ready to back you up, and a lot of who voted for him in 2016 and 2020, he said nothing when the Democrats had full control of the House of Representatives. And he might actually be able to do something about it. Same thing with AOC and Ilhan Omar and Ayanna Pressley and Rashida Tlaib and Jamal Bowman. When these people came into came into Washington, they had control of the House of Representatives. They had the ability as a voting bloc to hold up tons of legislation and use their leverage as a bloc, because that's what the squad was supposed to be like. The squad was supposed to be like a left-wing version of the Tea Party. How the Tea Party would stop legislation from happening and would try to go out of their way to make Barack Obama's life miserable. They were supposed to be like that. Vote as a bloc, withhold your vote in order to get legislation that is favorable to your constituents. But they did none of that. They have done none of it. They didn't stick to their guns one bit when they had the House of Representatives. When it comes to reparations, I told you right now, Barack Obama said we didn't need reparations because we had him. That was our reparations as black people. Joe Biden said that there was a black-white wealth gap because black people don't play enough records for their children. If you don't believe me, go look it up. Black kids don't hear as many words as white people. He believes that black people don't know how to raise our children. That's why there's a wealth gap between blacks and whites. Bernie Sanders basically had to be flogged and, almost tarred and feathered by Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson to tacitly support reparations. And only then he sort of did it when he was running for president in 2020. But when he got into office, when Joe Biden got into office, and the Democrats took over the House and had the House, and they had the Senate, nothing. Zilch. Zero. Zero effort whatsoever. to pass any legislation about reparations or about universal health care or a $15 minimum wage, which really should be a $24 minimum wage if you've been listening to the show. And I actually showed you how the minimum wage in 1968 is the equivalent of $24 today. None of it. The Democrats did not do any of it. Now, why are they doing this now? Why are they doing it now? They are doing it now because people like Ice Cube and other black people like myself are coming out and saying, look, the Democratic Party is a dead end for black people. There's no reason for us to keep giving our vote to a party that doesn't do a doggone thing for us and hasn't done anything for us since 1965 or something. And as a matter of fact, has done grievous harm to us since 1965. Whether it's the welfare industrial complex that forced black men out of houses in order for black women to get public assistance, whether it's Bill Clinton and Joe Biden becoming drug warriors in the 80s and ramping up mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex, or it's them supporting things like NAFTA, Bill Clinton signing NAFTA, and permanent trade relations with China, which helped destroy cities like the one I'm in right now. Gary, Indiana, Hammond, Indiana, East Chicago, Indiana, Flint, Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, Buffalo, Cleveland. All these cities affected by the trade deals that Clinton signed in the 90s. So they're hearing this, they're seeing this. They see that people are waking up. The left is criticizing the Democratic Party and does not see the Democratic Party as a left-wing party because they are not a left-wing party. They are a right-wing party just like the Republicans are. They fund wars, the prison industrial complex, and support corporations pillaging and exploiting workers and the environment. And so this is a stunt. They are pulling stunts. The Squad, Bernie Sanders, all these people are pulling stunts because they know that we are sick and tired of being led astray by these people. And the reason I did this story is because I know a lot of people, because I would have done it. Let me tell you, when I was a hardcore Democrat, when I was younger, when I was standing outside at 5:30 in the morning to vote for John Kerry and stuff, man, I was like, I would have eaten this up like, see, man, I told you Democrats support universal health care and they support reparations for black people. What are the Republicans doing? The Democrats don't support any of this crap. They are leading us astray. Again. I guess if there is one thing that you can glean from this show today especially is that we don't have a party whatsoever. Not the Democrats, not the Republicans. If you're a person on the left or just not a right-wing corporatist, you don't have a party. And especially if you're black or a minority, you do not have a party. We have one party that is so cynical that they trot people out there like Tim Scott and Vivek Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley out there to pretend that that it took 120 years to have a black governor in this country, but America's not a racist country. And then you have another party that panders to black people, that tells us what we want to hear, without any intention of actually doing anything for us. We don't have a party. I vote third party as a protest in national elections. I pay more attention to local elections. I make sure I vote in my local elections. What goes on here in Gary and in Northwest Indiana, that's has a lot more to do with what's going to happen here in my life regionally. But on the national level, we do not have a party whatsoever. And don't let these demagogues on MSNBC and CNN and Fox News try to trick you into thinking that you do. You don't. It's a big club and you ain't in it. All right, folks, we got to go to a break. My very last break. After that, I'm going to come and mop up and pay tribute to the Queen before I get out of here.
Suffering from